This kind of feels like a camera YouTuber come to Jesus moment because guess what? All cameras look good. All cameras can produce great images. Cameras from different camera companies can produce great images compared to each other. Cameras from the same company can also produce great images beside each other. Actually, yeah, we're going to talk about the Canon C50 versus the Canon R6 Mark III. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and this might be a hot take, but I think the image you get out of both these cameras look almost identically the same. I'm going to do a lot of side-by-side footage here just to kind of prove my point, but also we're going to talk about where the actual differences are, which is going to be the workflow from the bodies themselves, the menus, and as well as like a little bit of photography, but I'm not necessarily the best photographer in the world. We'll get there. Now, this video isn't sponsored by Canon Canada, but they did let me borrow both of these cameras. However, the sponsor of this video is going to be Artlist. They have a couple of AI tools, but they also have a bunch of awesome, really other stuff, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, sometimes when you're working with similar sensors between different companies, and also because I was shooting a lot of things in natural light, I didn't bring too much lighting out for this video. Sometimes the changes in where the sun position is going to be might change a little bit of the temperature here, but adjusting any of the images, getting them to grade with each other took less than a minute to do in terms of adjusting their white balance. So honestly, all of these images are going to look really similar to each other. The autofocus from the Canon R6 III and the Canon C50 look very much the same compared to each other, which actually is kind of nice. For the most part, they actually can grab onto darker skin tones, so that's a plus. Even when I got close up to the lens, it kind of started to hunt a little bit at the exact same time. The way the dynamic range works, although there is a test where Gerald Undone does reveal that there's a little bit of a discrepancy, in a real world situation, I don't really see that much of a difference between these two cameras. I even tried using the Super 35 mode on the Canon C50 to see if there was more dynamic range, and in the simple window test that I normally do in these videos, I still don't see a gigantic discernible difference. Both these guys are going to have very similar shooting modes, although there's a couple caveats we'll go into later on in this video, and they even have the same slow motion modes as shooting at 2K 180 frames a second as well. Now, both these cameras do have the ability to shoot in Canon C RAW or C RAW Lite. The data rates are going to be a little bit different depending on which camera you're going to use, but also you could use a 4K fine mode on the R6 III or just shoot in 4K downsampled on the Canon C50, which is kind of the same thing, it just has a different name, which is nice if you want to save on some file sizes. Now, one thing that I did notice on these two guys is going to be its dual base ISO, because they actually function a little bit differently, which means that they're going to look a little bit different. Now, they're both going to be 800 and 6400, where things will clean up around that 6400, and obviously at 800 at the base ISO, things are going to look pretty clean. However, on the Canon C50, we went through this on a previous video, you could actually set the base ISO on 6400 or 800, which is going to get you different results if you go to 6400 ISO, which is kind of the same on the C80 and some of the other C-series cameras, where the Canon R6 III doesn't do that, which means when you compare the 6400 at the base versus the other base, I guess, in the way in the R6 III, they're going to look a little bit different when you overexpose by 2 stops in 6400. The only thing is that practically most people aren't going to do that. So if you want to get some cleaner low light, 6400 on either camera is going to look great, although they are going to be a little bit different just how the dual base ISO works on the Canon C50. Now, between the R6 Mark III and the Canon C50, I think the images are pretty much going to look almost exactly the same. But where the biggest differences are going to be in the body design and also some of the menu settings and some of the features that are locked on one and unlocked on the other. If you want a TLDR, basically, if you want a photography camera that could have some of the features of the C50, then the R6 III makes more sense. If you're looking for something that's more video and photos not necessarily a priority, then just get the C50. There, you can click off the video. But if you want to know more details about this, here are some of the differences. The C50 obviously is going to be sort of that FX3 type of clone. It does have mounting points all over the body. It doesn't have a viewfinder, which the R6 III actually does have. And also some of the buttons and the dials are going to be a little bit different. A little bit different from the R6 Mark III, where you have an on button, a lock button, and off button, and then you could switch from your video and your photo on the other side on that dial. They put everything on the C50 all on one dial that you could switch from your photo, your video, and as well as you could use that as a custom button in the middle as well. Now, where the Canon C50 doesn't have a viewfinder, it does replace itself with one of, honestly, the best audio top handles I've ever used before. Where the Canon R6 Mark III does adhere to having more photography in mind because it does have that viewfinder. Speaking of the viewfinder, the R6 Mark III also has a mechanical shutter, which is why it has a little front curtain that goes over the sensor when you turn the camera off. Both these guys use the same media type and CF Express Type B and SD cards as well. Somebody actually asked to find out some of the rates and how long it would actually last on a 512 gigabyte card, and I'm going to put that on the screen, but keep in mind I might have to do this in the comments because there isn't enough characters for how many shooting modes both cameras have. Now, the C50 being more of a video styled body, that front button that is normally for the shutter, which is on the R6 Mark III, and the record button are going to do the same thing, which is record video in video mode. However, when I do this on the R6 Mark III, and it's something I could just kind of change in a custom setting, but I didn't do just yet, but you do have a record button that's dedicated there, and you do have a shutter button for photography. You just have to remember which one is which, because sometimes you might miss a shot, because my habit is to press on that shutter button like my S1 II, and even on the C50 itself, and it doesn't record video, and I get confused for a second, and then I realized I didn't press the record button. Now, today's video sponsor is going to be Artlist, and before we talk about some of the AI tools, just know they have pretty cool other stuff. They have a gigantic music and sound effects library that can help you out in your next project. I've used them for the last 5 or 6 years on different things, and what's nice about them is that you have a royalty-free license, so you could use it without any worry or any sort of hidden fees. You also could use some of their stock footage library that's still made by real filmmakers, which not only has a gigantic library of different clips, but also you could download the raw footage, and in my personal opinion, I think the stock footage library overall is just better looking. You're going to get things like LUTs and templates to make editing easier, but also you can have some of the AI tools they've added as well. They've now added in Nano Banana Pro. This is going to be the newest image generation where you could text to create a photo, which I personally use for projects when I want to do things like previs and planning out shots. A lot of times I have run and gun gigs and building out entire shot lists and storyboards. When I have enough time, I'm able to do, but sometimes I don't have the time to do that. And being able to generate multiple iterations of a location or a particular sequence, I could use Nano Banana Pro in order to do that. If I'm going to make any recommendation, it's to use it as a tool, not as a replacement for actual true art, filmmaking, and all the other things that you need in your creativity. Artlist right now does have a 40% off all their AI plans, or to 20% off all of their Max plans as well. Personally, for me, I like using the Max plan because not only do you get the AI tools, but you could also get all the other stuff from stock footage, sound effects, or music. A special shout out to Artlist for actually sponsoring this video, and yeah, let's talk more about these cameras because real people shot them, like me. Outside of that, it's still going to use the same full-frame RF sensor, which is still a closed mount, and we would love to see them not have a closed mount. That'd be awesome. But some of the other things are going to be inside of the camera itself. One of the things that I noticed on the R6 Mark III that people were relieved with on the Canon C50, which they actually didn't fix on the R6 Mark III, which if you open the battery door, the memory card slot on either side of this camera, the R6 Mark III actually turns off, where the Canon C50 doesn't, which was just a weird observation that I found when changing out my cards. So if you're hoping the R6 Mark III is going to keep the camera on when you change out a card, and obviously if you take out a battery, it's not going to stay on, but yeah, it's going to actually turn off every time you open one of the two doors. There's also going to be some video-centric differences as well between the Canon C50 and as well as the R6 Mark III. The Canon C50 does have the ability to have focus peaking, which you could do on the R6 Mark III, but it doesn't have false color. It also doesn't have anamorphic support, so if you're shooting on an anamorphic lens, you won't be able to de-squeeze in camera. Matter of fact, and I think this is just a pre-production thing, but I also couldn't use manual focus lenses on the R6 Mark III at all, which was kind of strange and actually a little bit frustrating. Honestly, it's probably just a setting and it's pre-production, so I'm not going to fault the camera for that, but when I tried to use a PL adapted lens, the record button didn't work, which was weird. Now, both cameras do have different menu UIs depending on the mode you're shooting in. Now, if you're on the R6 Mark III, whether you're in video or you're on photo, the UI is going to look pretty much exactly the same. However, on the C50, it actually borrows from the cinema menus from the C80, the R5C, the C400, and you're going to get some of those Canon cinema features in terms of what the menu looks like versus using everything in the photo menu when you're using the R6 Mark III. Now, if you are using photography mode on the Canon C50, you're going to get a similar UI if you were using photo on an R6 Mark III, so the extra menu UI is going to be unique on the Canon C50 and the cinema menus between these two cameras. Now, a lot of the shooting modes are going to be the same in terms of shooting in 7K, open gate, shooting in RAW. They might have a little bit of different names and data rates, and I showed that in the memory card side of things, but also I noticed that you can't do movie cropping in RAW on the Canon R6 Mark III. Now, on the Canon C50, you could shoot at full frame 3x2, full frame Super 35, and Super 16, but when you try to do movie cropping on the R6 Mark III, you can go ahead and do that, but you just don't have RAW as an option. Outside of that, in terms of some of the features in camera and also some of the body designs, they're almost exactly the same thing, which is actually kind of nice and comforting, especially when they're made by the same manufacturer. Now, in terms of the UI on both these cameras, they're both exactly the same. You have a full-size HDMI, you have a headphone jack, you have a microphone jack there as well. The only difference is on the Canon C50, being more of a video-centric camera, is that you do have a timecode port in there, which is going to come in handy, especially if you're recording sound between multiple cameras. And if you look at the bottom of the bodies between these two cameras, there's an extra little hole that's on the Canon C50 that's made for a grip that I still have yet to see on the Canon C50 to begin with. Also, I think it would have made more sense if they put the same little spot at the bottom of the R6 Mark III, because there's more chance that you're going to have a battery grip on a photography camera than you would on a compact cinema camera. But that's nor here nor there. Okay, well, editor Kofi here. I made a mistake. A little while ago, I did say the Canon R6 III wouldn't work when I had manual lenses on it. And the reason for that is a setting that's in the camera that I just didn't know that existed. Basically, if you have the release camera shutter without a lens button turned off, what's going to end up happening is that if you don't have a lens on it here, the shutter shouldn't release or take a photo. I had that turned on, and I'm assuming that if you have a manual lens onto here, because it's manual, it may not actually recognize that on the camera with electronic pins on it. So all of the testing that I did do, where I should have probably tried anamorphic lenses onto this, I didn't do. But we also already established the image is gonna look exactly the same from this guy to the C50 anyway. So yeah, just make sure you don't turn that setting on, because it might not go well for you. Hey, so I'm just going to chime in here and have a couple of things that I might have missed throughout this video that you're wondering, and here it is. So for overheating, I live in Canada and it's November, so I only really tested the RAW modes because I have a 1 terabyte card, and if you think that I'm going to not use 7K OpenGate RAW, you're sadly mistaken. But it's nice to say that in OpenGate at RAW at the highest bit rate possible, yeah, the card filled before the camera actually overheated. In fact, I got to like a half an hour before that little overheating bar even showed up, and the card was full long before that overheating gauge went up. Now, that's not necessarily going to be the same result on the 7K RAW in OpenGate at 60 frames a second, because I only got about 18 minutes, which honestly, truthfully, I probably wouldn't shoot in 7K RAW at 60 frames a second for 18 minutes anyways. And if you're shooting a wedding or shooting something else, you can just use other modes instead, which are a lot more efficient. Now, in terms of doing other modes, I don't know, just double and give it to the next person, because like I don't live in an environment where I could actually test these overheating properly. Actually, you know what? Let me do this. I'm gonna go to Nigeria and we're gonna test out all the extreme conditions. I didn't go because I can't. Now, if you want to see other overheating results in different shooting modes, Gerald Undone just did one yesterday, and Anthony Gugliotta did one last week, which is also kind of weird because asking 3 Canadians to test overheating is kind of strange at this time of year. Regardless, in indoor environments, which I feel like a lot of people are probably going to be in outside of shooting weddings in the desert, I think you're going to be fine shooting in 24 frames a second on most modes. And you have to go down to slow motion in 4K, which I would recommend if you're worried about overheating. I think you're going to be fine too, because I think Anthony found it to be like an hour and a half. Also, I did find false color on the R6 Mark III. It was just hell to try to find it. It's in one of the menus that's in the back end, or it's not necessarily in the same place as being on the C50, but that also makes sense because they have 2 different menus. So yeah, user error there. I don't shoot with Canon very often. I'm just here to test them because, well, Canon let me. Now, my money don't jiggle jiggle, it folds, but you know what jiggle jiggles is gonna be the C50 and the R6 Mark III. Tried a couple of IBIS tests using both of these cameras on the C50 and the R6 III. The C50 doesn't have IBIS where the R6 III does, and both of them kind of just have wobbly corners when you shoot at wide angles, which, I mean, y'all asked for it. You guys asked for IBIS in the R6 Mark III, and this is what you got. I personally would prefer just using the Canon C50, rigging it out, and then just having my in-body stabilization from there. But I could also understand it being a little bit annoying if you want to use the R6 III as a vlogging camera. Depending on the focal length you're using, it's going to be a little bit different. I only have a 24-70, so I can't test it at like 16 millimeters. But yeah, in both situations, the IBIS wobbles a little bit. Now, this might get on your nerves, and I did cover this in a previous video, but the Canon C50 can record sound in S&Q mode. It just can't do it at 120 frames a second. You also can't natively shoot 120 frames a second with sound and then just kind of slow it down and post either way. If you go into S&Q mode on the Canon C50, it's not going to have any sound. But if you use that sound option, it'll record it to a separate card. Now, on the flip side, the R6 III can do it, and it can do it onto one card entirely. So I could record a file at 120 frames a second on the R6 Mark III, and I could still get sound, which actually proposes a video setting that the R6 Mark III can do that the Canon C50 can't. Now, this also might be user error, but so far, after trying this over and over again, I haven't been able to figure it out. I've tried a bunch of different compression modes between the Alt-Intra, the Long GOP, and all of the recording modes and all of the resolutions, and it just seems like it could do it on the R6 III, but it can't do it on the Canon C50, which is kind of a bummer. Now, something I haven't talked about often on this channel is actually going to be photography settings. Now, the Canon C50 has an electronic shutter, which means that that little curtain doesn't come down when you turn the camera off. Whereas this guy, I could do this. Camera go, Basically, someone more qualified than me is going to tell you the difference between an electronic shutter and one that's going to be mechanical. From my understanding, the burst modes are going to be a little bit less, where you can get up to about 30 frames per second if you're going to shoot in the electronic burst mode, and 12 shots that you're going to get mechanical. But the reason why you use mechanical over an e-shutter is things like not having weird jello artifacts, especially when you have fast-moving objects. Now, I did shoot at an amateur boxing tournament a little while ago, and maybe they weren't fast enough for me to catch that, but I didn't necessarily see a problem in either one of these two guys. But I think if I was shooting something like cars or rooms with really high flickering lights, yeah, that might have actually affected my images if I was using an electronic shutter. Now, you could take photos on both of these two cameras. They both have 33 megapixel sensors. So in certain situations, one that I couldn't find in the limited time I have both these cameras, I couldn't find a difference between the mechanical and the electronic. However, much more qualified photographers than me, especially people that use flash photography, you know what? This is your opportunity. You could go in the comments, you could educate myself and everybody else, because I have to give these back and I don't have time to find a situation where that changes anything. Now, both these two cameras are going to be different prices from each other, obviously. The Canon R6 Mark III is closer to $2,800, where there's about a $1,000 difference in the Canon C50. Now, keep in mind, you get an extra accessory on the Canon C50 in that audio top handle, and you get a couple other things in terms of the capabilities from what you can shoot, not necessarily what it looks like. As someone who's broken multiple top handles from the Sony FX3, some of that $1,000 price tag is actually almost more than half of it probably goes into that audio top handle, which you're not going to get on the Canon R6 Mark III. Nonetheless, if you were to buy either package, you have to spend the $1,000 extra. Now, whether or not I think it's going to be worth it for you, it's just going to come up to your use case. If you want a more video-centric body that's still going to be on the more compact side and having things like Pro XLR audio is going to be important to you, well, then the Canon C50 is going to make sense. And when you're doing video, you're probably making money with it, getting a camera at this price point, so you could probably justify that as well. And if you're someone that wants to save a little bit of money, you really want in-body stabilization, and you do a little bit more photo than you would expect, then just get the Canon R6 Mark III and be super happy. Because at the end of the day, you're still only going to have RF lenses on either one of these two cameras, but they do have a bunch of capabilities that work with other manual lenses as well. I kind of feel the same way as a lot of people talking about cameras now, where I feel like we're kind of hitting the edge of like, what are the big differences from an image quality perspective? I think there's going to be a bunch of different workflow things that are going to be a little bit different, but in terms of what the camera's images can produce, I think we've kind of topped out, or at least we're very close to the top. The only thing we can get now is maybe like an open gate or an anamorphic support, or like couple things here and there that would make your life a little bit easier. But that being said, I also make these videos because I find them fun and entertaining. And you guys find them fun and entertaining because you keep asking me to make them. Just let me have a break. Nah, I'm just kidding. I don't even sleep. But special shout out to Artlist for sponsoring this video. I obviously have more videos just like this coming up, because what's nice about having this channel over the last couple of years, you get access to stuff, and we kind of have this little water cooler talk here about cameras just to find out that from an image perspective, they all look the same. Yeah, I don't have any Ghanaian language words of the day, and I haven't recently, and there's a reason for that, but that'll be in a later video. All right, peace.